knowing your math vocabulary is a huge part of being able to solve the kinds of problems you're going to need to solve. For example, this is just a starter list of some of the math vocabulary you'll need to know, but your best strategy as you're studying, when you run across a term you don't know, to look it up and make a flashcard for it, and then work with those flashcards to memorize the meaning of these terms. And the reason that we need to memorize them is because we're going to run into all kinds of problems where we use these terms and it's assumed that you know what these mean. So like I said, this is just a selection, but we have terms that describe the characteristics of a number, like whether the number is even or odd, or positive or negative. We have vocabulary terms that describe parts of a fraction, the numerator and the denominator. We have terms that describe what kind of arithmetic we're doing. These are all the results of addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. Length, area, and volume all relate to two-dimensional or three-dimensional objects, measuring the length of something, finding its area, the amount of space inside a two-dimensional object, or finding its volume, the amount of space inside a three-dimensional object. Radius, diameter, and circumference, these are all specific to circles in particular, and measure things about the circles. And then something like a variable, which expresses an unknown quantity. Distinct means that two different things are unique, they have unequal values. And then you have things like rate and average, which are particular values that you find in certain situations. So an example of where we might have a problem that uses terms like this is maybe something like this. We might be told the quotient of the diameter and radius is 1/3 of the circumference of the circle. Find an expression for the radius. So you can see here we're using quotient, diameter, radius, and circumference. So if we don't know what those things mean, we're obviously not going to be able to work through a problem like this one. But if we do know those terms, then we can start to build a mathematical expression from the word problem. So we can start translating the words into mathematics. So for example, here we say the quotient of the diameter and the radius. Well, the quotient is the result of division. So the quotient of the diameter and the radius is what we get when we divide the diameter by the radius. So we could write that as the diameter divided by the radius. And this would be the quotient of the diameter and the radius. We know that the diameter is the distance across a full circle through the center of that circle, and the radius is half that. It's the distance from the center of the circle to the edge. So the diameter is always twice the radius. So instead, we could write this as 2 times the radius divided by the radius, and that would be the same thing. And then if we know how to work with fractions, we know that radius in the numerator cancels out with radius in the denominator, and the result here is 2. And then we're told that that value is 1/3 of the circumference of a circle. Well, the circumference of a circle is the distance around the edge of the circle, and it's always equal to 2 pi r, where r is the radius of the circle. And we're told that this value we found here, 2, is 1/3 of the circumference, which means that if we multiply 2 by 3, then these two values are now equal to one another. And so you can see how just by knowing this vocabulary, we're able to translate these words into a mathematical expression. And then we'll go through this later, but we could simplify this and say 6 is equal to 2 pi times r. We could divide both sides by 2 and get 3 is equal to pi times r. And then we could divide both sides by pi, and we could say the radius is equal to 3 divided by pi. And now we have an expression, a value, for the radius of the circle. So the goal here is not yet to understand all of this math. The goal is to realize that knowing these vocabulary terms is really important for taking a word problem, translating it into mathematics so that we can then go about solving for a specific value. So as you come across new vocabulary, just take the time to look up the meaning if you don't know what it is already, make a flashcard for it, and then practice those flashcards until all of this vocabulary starts to feel comfortable.